Hey friend, welcome back to this particular episode in the module on cultivating and growing board relationships. You know, this is the second part of a two-part series on having difficult conversations. And just a quick review of what we talked about in the first video. We talked about 4 different things that you need to have in mind as you're approaching and engaging in a difficult conversation. 1 is to define the issue. 2 is to be emotionally present. 3, to know who is in the conversation, and 4, to balance grace and truth. As pastors and board members, the overwhelming majority of the time we're scooting along and all things are good. We're operating in unity, but every so often we might need to have a difficult conversation. And that's what these 2 episodes are all about. So today I want to talk about the intangibles of these difficult conversations. So you're not going to be able to put your finger exactly on most of this, but these intangibles are very real in our lives and in the life of the person that we're going to have the difficult conversation with. So again, pastor, board member to board member to pastor, however these conversations go, you need to operate. If you'll pay attention to these intangibles that we're going to talk about today, you're going to be glad you did. So let's jump into the first one. You're going to need to be talking about your feelings. Now, some pastors and board members are not feeling-oriented people, so this might be a bit of a challenge, but the reality is, how many times has an action of someone precipitated a feeling inside of you? And there isn't even any logic to it, because feelings don't have to have logic, but it's real. So you need to start in a conversation with someone you're having the difficult conversation with how you feel, because they can't deny. Well, they can try to, but no one really can deny another person's feelings. But talk about how you feel, and then how your sense is that these feelings are precipitated from the action of that other person. Now, this can be a challenge, I understand, but if you'll do this, you'll actually set the stage to be able to move forward better. Now, you got to be able to connect the dots between their action and your feelings. That, again, is a challenge. But when you can do that, you're going to find yourself moving further down the line, because their action might be, certainly, it's probably based in their logic, and your feelings are feelings. You've got to work as the person initiating the conversation to connect those dots in order to help that other person see that there's a potential for them to make improvement. If that person suggests something they could do that might mitigate this conflict between their actions and their feelings, you need to jump on that. Grab a hold of that, thank them, say, wow, my sense is that really would be helpful. And that begins to move you towards resolution. In all this, when you're talking about feelings, be transparent. Do not be accusatory. That's not going to get you very far at all. Number 2, affirm and validate. You need to affirm the person and validate them as a person. The reality is, you're talking with a friend, your pastor, fellow board member, so you need to affirm and validate. Number 3, own your own stuff. This can be a bit of a challenge. Because the reality is, you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. No board is perfect. No pastor is perfect. So each of us, have to own our own stuff. Own the fact that if I'm particularly sensitive in the feelings area, I got to own that and not wear that on my shirt sleeve all the time. If I'm particularly insensitive in the emotional area, I've got to own that. The reality is, I have to examine my feelings if I'm going to initiate a difficult conversation with somebody, because it's me, and I know me, and I know my weaknesses. I got to own it. Now, they got to own theirs as well, but I can't control that. I can control owning mine. Now, when you have this conversation, you want them to see your side of the story. And then, of course, you need to see theirs. And that, in owning your own stuff, will help you get to that. Number 4, be specific about the next steps. If the person immediately acquiesces, oh, Pastor, I'm so sorry, or hey, Joe, I'm so sorry. I did not mean for my actions to cause this conflict within you or between us. So, man, I'm sorry. I own it. When that happens, be a big boy, big girl, and you need to accept it, forgive them, thank them, and move on. Now, if the person is hesitant, and this happens, where they're not immediately saying, "Oh man, I'm bad, you're good," they're kind of wondering whether really what you're talking about, but they're not against you. They're just hesitant. I would suggest that you carry that conversation through, pray, and come back together and talk about it again and get it all the way ironed out. Get them to the point where their hesitancy becomes a sense of, okay, I can make adjustments here, and your feelings from your end can shift to the point, compromise to the point where you don't get as worked up when they do this or that. The difficult one is when the person on the other side of the table or the coffee shop there is hostile to your confronting them about their behavior. Now, I'm sure the folks at your board table never get hostile about anything, or your pastor, but from time to time, human beings can do that. Now, here's the reality. If this is a pastor to board member, a pastor can use their position to get their way. That almost never works. So, pastor, please don't do that. Board members need to use their influence, both with the pastor and with the board and a fellow board member, if they're having difficult conversation. The reality is, you need to become a student of appropriate negotiation. Now, that doesn't sound very spiritual, but the reality is we're dealing with human beings, co-laborers, partners in ministry, and we need to be able to connect with them in these difficult conversations and be able to be specific about how we're going to move forward to the next level. And if you're able and you've learned to give and take, you're going to see yourself moving way down the line in having these conversations. Number 5, forgiving and trusting. I was serving a church here a few years ago in the Midwest where they were doing a senior pastor search. And this was a great church, had rich history. But the pastor who had left, really left a lot of damage in his wake. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at the pastor, at the board, or whatever, but I will say there was a board member left. Now, this guy was a brilliant guy. He was a medical doctor, just a smart guy, loved God, full of the Spirit. But I'm telling you, when you would bring up the name of this previous pastor, you would see his demeanor turn red. You could see anger flush up within him. He was dealing with serious hurt and an absence of being able to forgive. The pastor had not sought forgiveness, but the board member needed to forgive. And at that particular point, I just read The Bait of Satan. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it in this kind of situation, because you have to, harboring resentment will eat you up. I don't care if you're a board member, you're a pastor, you're a spiritual leader in the church. Harboring resentment and not forgiving is going to eat your lunch. I'm just telling you, it's that bad. And I believe over the months and years, that good brother was able to move to a point of forgiveness and continue to contribute well to the church. But he had to forgive. Now, when you're embarking on this forgiveness and trusting piece, and a person is genuinely sorry for the offense they have caused you, in routine differences, you can just pretty much move on and not spend a lot of time with it. If there are issues of deeper consequence, like this board member had with that former pastor, that's going to take time. And time is a great healer. Now, Jesus did not call us to harbor resentment between board member to board member, or board member to pastor to board member. He taught us to forgive. And when the disciples asked Jesus how many times to forgive, we all know the answer to that one. So you forgive, and you have to move on. Routine issues, you can do it faster. Deeper issues, you've got to take time and allow the Lord to bring the healing. You have to ask the Lord to trust again. In your relationships at the board table, it's not a marriage, but it's like when damage has happened in a marriage. Boy, to be able to trust again is a big, big deal, and it takes time. But you can move forward at the board table with your co-laborers that are around the table if you'll forgive and begin to trust again. So what's our takeaway from this episode? We did this again in 2 parts because it's a big, big subject. And if you'll pay attention to it, your board is going to move along much smoother. Even when you hit bumps, you're going to navigate them properly. Now, again, as we said at the very beginning of the first episode, we don't live for these conversations. Nobody's sitting there saying, man, I love conflict. I want to have a conversation and just kind of, no, nobody does that. But the reality is, if you're going to be a growing church, you're going to have these conversations in order to move forward. Confronting the actions is never easy. Articulating them and all that goes with that. But it's very, very necessary because those actions precipitate feelings within us, and those feelings then begin to cloud our thinking and action. We've got to own our own stuff. We have to be affirming of the other person, and we have to be transparent. And then we've got to forgive and trust again. If you can do these things, and particularly do these in a Matthew 18 God-honoring way, you're going to see God do absolutely miraculous things in your church. And the sky's the limit to what God's going to do with a unified pastor and board leading the charge. Make it a great one today. I'm going to look forward to seeing you in the next video. Be blessed.